This video will cover Chapter 14, Two Societies at War. We will begin with Section 1, titled Secession and the Military Stalemate. As we learned at the end of Chapter 13, the 1860 election saw Abraham Lincoln become president. So there was a period between November 1860 and March 1861 when he would take the presidency that you began to see states leave the Union. A lot of them feared their states' rights being in danger because of Abraham Lincoln's stand on slavery. So it first begins with South Carolina, that is a place that has seen its fair share of rejection on federal law. If you remember, we've seen it we saw it as one of the states that rejected the different tariffs by Andrew Jackson, and now here in 1860. They decide under a state assembly to secede, and so they leave the Union to be off as a own republic, but as more as other states see this, well, there actually is fueled by the fire eaters in different states, and you see that this idea of secession becomes popular in the Deep South. In the Deep South, you have Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, and then Texas being the last one to become to leave the Union. And then you have this group really become their own United States, and they call it the Confederate States of America. So they themselves are creating a nation away from the United States, and the United States, right? Is trying to keep the Union together, but the problem is that within the period that Abraham Lincoln will take his presidency, the current president Buchanan really does nothing. He is not equipped with the strength, the grit to be able to maintain the Union. So he just lets things happen. He's a big supporter of states' rights. So within his own ideology, he knows that the states have that right to leave the Union, and therefore the Union has no power to prevent it by force. So one of the key locations that intensifies this conflict is Fort Sumter, which is a fort in South Carolina, and this fort is obviously, you would say, an enemy territory now that the South has created its own union. And so this is a place where the Confederate States of America will eventually launch their attack, and will eventually. This is kind of what is considered the beginning of the Civil War. As you can see here in this map, this red line identifies the first seven states that secede, right? Being South Carolina being the first, and then Mississippi, and then Florida, and then Alabama, Georgia, then Louisiana, and Texas. So in that order, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That's the order that they eventually secede. And you will see that later, after the takeover of Fort Sumter, you will add 4 more states to the secession: Virginia, Tennessee, Arkansas, and North Carolina. And then you have these are what we call the border states: the Missouri, Arkansas, Kentucky, Tennessee, Virginia, North Carolina, Maryland, Delaware, and you can see that four states went into secession, and four states wanted to remain in the Union. And this is an image of the Alabama flag after the secession, independent now and forever. Meaning that they weren't thinking about returning to the Union. They were really identifying themselves as their own republic. While Buchanan felt powerless in maintaining the Union, he did urge Congress to come up with a compromise to be able to restore the Union. That compromise is known as the Crittenden Compromise, which eventually had two parts. First part was a amendment that would protect slavery in the states where it existed, which did pass. And then the second part, which is where it didn't work for both sides, which was that they would extend the Missouri Compromise line all the way out to California, and so which meant that, and also part of the compromise was that they could add whenever we would add more territory to the Union, to the United States, that they could eventually make it a slave state. One of the places, Cuba, and then certain northern states of Mexico that some congressmen wanted would become slave states. So that's where it went south. That's where it didn't work out for both sides. While they agreed on the amendment, they didn't agree on extending the opportunity of slavery. And mainly the opposition was by Lincoln, who felt that while you may have the institution of slavery, you may keep it, but we will not expand on the Union. We will not expand on having slavery. So the for Abraham Lincoln, as he takes office in March of 1861, and he delivers his first inaugural address, he talks about, he's trying to convince the South that he wants to maintain the Union, that he's willing to allow them to keep their slaves, but he will not allow the expansion of it. But at the same time, he's trying to he's trying to persuade them, but at the same time, he's also threatening them. He's saying, you may not secede. Secession is illegal. You must join the Union or face war. And so one of the things that why it continued, the conflict continued, was because the South didn't really believe Lincoln would allow for slavery to continue. They felt that as soon that was just him talking, that eventually he would implement within his cabinet abolitionists that would eventually take out the ability to have the institution of slavery. So when you begin to see the conflict develop, you see Lincoln trying to maintain it and in peacefully, but then also says, if we must go to war, then we will go to war. And then you can see that for the Southerners, this is something that they feel like it was a responsibility on their behalf to protect their way of life. And so, like I said, the first consider the first interaction of war was for Sumter, so that you see that they eventually the Confederate States of America will eventually take control of the fort, and while firing shots and cannons, that is the beginning of the war. And then Lincoln, as he sees this develop into the war, he eventually calls for assistance, calls for 70,000 militiamen, and is asking northern states to provide regiments of soldiers. basically volunteering, saying, "Here are my soldiers." And most northern states were very willing. Some of the states said more than what they needed, what the union needed. And so that's something that you could see in the beginning. A lot of the northern states were fully supportive of Abraham Lincoln's actions. And something to think about, right? We look at the reason for war, why this became a civil war. It was all, there are many complex causes, but at the root of all these complex causes is the owning of slaves. And you can kind of see how the percentages vary among the slave owners, right? 38 percent of the slave owning families were in Confederate states. 24% were in the Confederate border states, and then 14% of them were in the Union border states. And you can kind of see the percentages that existed again for the ownership of slaves. And like I said, the idea, the start of the war, you could say, is for Sumter.